1.
And good morning again, everybody. Hopefully you've had time to make a cup of tea and so on, ready for our second session, the roundtable. You may need to refresh your screens to get the most up-to-date view, but it's going to be the same, similar format as this morning, where you can post questions just to the right of your screens. I'm now going to introduce Richard Steele, who's Director of Port Skills and Safety, who is going to be leading this session, and ask him to introduce his fellow panelists. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, everyone, panel and delegates, to the Port Skills and Safety Mental Health and Wellbeing webinar. So the purpose of today's session is to learn together about mental health and wellbeing in the workplace. And I have 3 objectives. At the end of this session, you will have an increased awareness of how employers can create good work that promotes positive mental health and well-being. You will have an increased understanding of some of the challenges that you and or your colleagues might experience around mental ill health in the workplace. And you will go away with at least one positive idea or approach that you can take back to your own organisation that might help someone in need. We've got an extraordinarily powerful lineup of guest panelists for you today, and I am genuinely, personally grateful to all of them for finding the time to be here. As with the best theatre, we've got a 3-act structure planned for you today. Act 1 will be guest speaker sessions, and that will begin with a sort of keynote from Wendy, and then each of the sessions thereafter, slightly shorter sessions, will follow from each of our additional first class speakers. Act 2 will be almost like a sort of question time structure. So I will throw out some questions to the panel. So if you want to hear less from me and more from you as an audience, Act 3 is when we will bring in questions from the audience through the question or chat section on Swapcard. As I said, we've got a first-class panel introducing in alphabetical order by surname. Wendy Freeman has been in post as the Group Occupational Health Manager for Peel Port since 2018. She's qualified as a registered general nurse, and her career path has led to occupational health roles in various industries, including aerospace, car manufacturing, logistics, and food industry. In between these, Wendy has also studied postgraduate degrees in business management and has undertaken additional health and safety qualifications. Peter Kelly is Senior Psychologist at the Health and Safety Executive. He's the Practitioner Chair of the European Academy of Occupational Health Psychology. He's a technical expert on mental health and well-being and prevention of work-related stress. And Peter's been part of the team of psychologists involved from the beginning in developing the scientific knowledge base for the management standards approach to tackling work-related stress in Great Britain. He's also the co-author of a number of papers published on management standards, health and well-being. Stuart Pollard is a passionate health and safety and well-being professional with a wealth of knowledge and experience from a number of sectors. His approach is to challenge the norm, to make things engaging and dynamic and memorable, so that people talk about health, safety and well-being in a way that encourages learning, desirable and good behaviours, and opens up possibilities for change. Catherine Spain is Senior Harbour Master with the Port of London Authority and is part of the PLA's senior management team. That means she's responsible for the management of navigational safety on the tidal Thames. She previously spent 18 years at sea on a variety of vessels, including container ships and fast ferries. And last but absolutely not least, Claudia Trotter. Claudia acts as a main point of contact for Mates in Mind. She offers advice and guidance on developing mental health programs, including areas such as assessing needs, planning next steps, ensuring that objectives are met, organising and learning and development, and optimising support structures, and helping to measure relevant organisational improvement. So, as I promised, hopefully you're not going to hear too much more from me, but our speakers. And what I would like to do now is hand over to Wendy Freeman, who is going to do the keynote introductory session. Wendy.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Richard, for such a nice introduction. So, as Richard said, my name is Wendy Freeman. I'm the Group Occupational Health Manager here at the Port of Liverpool. So we're here today to look at mental health and explore how we can best support our colleagues. And I think the fact that we're having this conversation is such a positive progression. But I do need to stress at this point that I'm not a mental health nurse, I'm a registered nurse, nor am I an expert in the field. However, I am a nurse with many years of experience working in predominantly male environments and have plenty of life experience in my 21 plus years on this planet. So I qualified as a registered general nurse in 1985. I can see everybody working out how old I am now. So during a 2-week holiday from my staff nurse job after I qualified, I did some agency work, and I went to a factory in Liverpool for an ad hoc shift. Absolutely loved it. They offered me a job, and a month later my journey into occupational health began. So over the years, I continued to work between the NHS and acute areas and occupational health in many settings, of which Richard alluded to. But it was in the early days of my occupational health career that I set foot in the Port of Liverpool for the first time. So occupational health was really different then, with the emphasis being placed on providing emergency aid above everything else. But my recollection of the port in those days was that it was a really tough environment with very little emphasis being placed on the well-being of dock workers. I mean, I can just remember at 7 a.m. every morning, the door to the Labour office would open and the vessel bosses would all walk out onto a platform to a sea of stevedores, all hoping for work that day. It was a scrum of them all vying for attention, as failure to be picked meant basically no work, no money for that day. And it was a battle for survival where the toughest thrived, really. Weakness couldn't be seen if you wanted to earn a living. And that sight has stayed with me over the years. When I got the opportunity to come back to the Port of Liverpool 3 years ago, I embraced this challenge because I remember that so vividly. So since I started working in occupational health, UK and European legislation have improved working conditions no end for many of us, including our colleagues within port environments. It still does remain a challenging environment, and I would say not for the faint-hearted, given that many of the roles are still labour intensive in an outdoor environment that can be as harsh as the British weather can throw at us. While we have some female dock workers, it's still a male-dominated environment, certainly here. So just going back to my nurse training and my experience of psychiatry, it was first addressed in college in a learning setting, and that was followed up by 3 months placement in a local hospital. Some of my group went to the hospital that we were training in, which was newly built and everything was brand spanking new. And I was in the group that went to the old Victorian workhouse 2 miles down the road. And this Victorian workhouse contained 4 psychiatric wards. So you can get the image. If anyone's seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, we're not far out. That is the best way that I can describe it. The wards were locked. There were bars on the window, locks on all the doors. You couldn't get into the kitchen. And the worst thing, if somebody wanted bath, the nurse had to get the keys off the nurse in charge, go into the office, unlock a drawer, take the head of the tap out, physically go into the bathroom, run the bath for the individual, take the tap head and go and lock it away again. I was absolutely horrified at what I saw in those days. I mean, I was a wet behind the ears 19-year-old, and I was just shocked by it. It was generally a place of violence and aggression. There's no other way of saying it. Having said that, let's fast forward to the present day, and it's with absolute relief that mental health services within the NHS have improved so significantly over the last couple of decades. So there's now far more community-based services who work alongside our charities in supporting individuals with mental health problems. So what is mental health? Wow, a big subject. In a nutshell, we all have it, but for some of us it's healthy and some of us it's not. Exactly the same as with physical health. So we can all stick a plaster on a paper cut, but if that cut was deep and needed stitches, we go to hospital. So what is the difference with mental health? The problem is we can't see it. Some individuals cover it up really well. It can be caused by a plethora of problems, including physical health problems, such as chemical imbalances within the brain. It might be due to psychological trauma, whether that be from abuse, an accident, life-changing events. It can be caused by loneliness or bereavement. And it can just be caused by too much going on in our lives, and our brain is a sponge and can't take any more. I'm just going to throw this out there as well. It can be caused by society's misconceptions or the stigma associated with mental health. So someone may be struggling but doesn't get help because they perceive they will be considered to be weak or a lesser person because they're unable to cope. So what may start as them feeling overwhelmed can result, if not treated, not necessarily with medication, in rapidly spiraling mental illness that becomes difficult to rectify, and unfortunately can result in suicide in worst case scenarios. Whatever the cause, though, mental health is very subjective. What one person finds manageable, another is unable to cope with. So it's about resilience in part, but also the levels of pressure and life circumstances that hit each and every one of us. So it's important to note that we all respond to stresses and strains differently in our everyday life, and this is what makes it difficult at times to identify mental health problems. So while the recent hoo-ha, for want of a better expression, well, Dame Carol Black set the ball rolling back in 2008 when she reviewed the health of the working population and the social and economic cost of society in her landmark review, and that was called Working for a Healthier Tomorrow. And this led to a whole host of workplace health reviews and some really good, significant work being done, with employers now realising the benefits of workplace health. So let's jump forward to 2017, and the government commissioned a further review specifically to look at the impact of poor mental health at work, which was undertaken by Lord Stevenson and Paul Farmer, the CEO of Mind. So those reviews findings were pretty grim. There were some 300,000 people who experience long-term health problems that lose their job every year. And they reckon that 15% of people in work were having symptoms of an existing mental health problem, with an estimated cost to employers of somewhere between 33 and 42 billion pounds a year. So the government did accept all the recommendations made by a Stevenson Farmer review, and subsequently issued an Improving Lives, which was a work, health and disability paper. So has Dame Carol Black's tomorrow finally arrived? No, not yet, but things are greatly improving from where we were a decade ago, without a doubt. But what the Stevenson Farmer review does do very well is give us some very clear and sensible direction in how to tackle this problem within the workplace. So where do we as a group start? It seems like a huge task, but actually we need to strip it back to basics. Much of it is a common sense approach and a gradual introduction of improvements. And in my experience, trying to do this overnight is a recipe for disaster because you're not going to achieve your objective fully. So included within these Stevenson Farmer recommendations were 6 core mental health standards that include things like implementing mental health at work plan, developing mental health awareness, encouraging conversations around mental health, improving working conditions, and monitoring employee mental health and wellbeing. On top of that, there is a further set of enhanced standards for larger organisations, and these standards take it a little further and look at accountability, transparency, and provision of in-house support. So the first task is undoubtedly to get buy-in at most senior level within the organisation, and then look at the core standards objectively, considering what's in place and developing a mental health work plan. It may well be that your organisation can meet a lot of these standards relatively easily, but if it's done objectively, you can perhaps think outside the box and how you can further enhance these objectives. So there are so many things that can improve mental well-being that aren't necessarily obvious under the mental health umbrella, such as improving the welfare facilities, flexible working policies, employee engagement initiatives. I'm sure I don't need to tell you, everyone needs to feel valued and demotivated demotivation will impact upon our mental health significantly. In our case here at the Port Liverpool, we're still developing our plan, and this will be an ongoing process, as it should be. However, significant elements were placed into our organisational health plan as a starting point to get the ball rolling. So as an example, part of this was we reviewed our employee assistance programme and improved the service offered by providing more face-to-face counselling, as well as telephonic helplines to all employees. So there are core standards that can be met without significant cost, such as monitoring employee health and wellbeing. That can be done through some accurate sickness absence reporting, whether it be health statistics if you have an occupational health service. If you've got an employee assistance programme, they provide you with quarterly management information reports, which can give you some really valuable information as to how you're doing as an organisation. The key, however, to successfully meeting both core and enhanced standards has to be communication. It's about removing the stigma attached to mental health. We're happy to support and discuss if someone has a plaster cast on their leg, but how often do we turn a blind eye to someone who's behaving out of character? The problem faced is that the people really don't know what to look for, and even if they do, they don't feel equipped to deal with it. So we have to get the message out to individuals, particularly in such a tough macho environment, that mental health problems are not something to be ashamed of, and nor is it weakness that should be hidden for fear of reprisal. So how do we do this? Well, it's twofold. We have to provide the individuals with the message and equip them within the information of how to get support. But we also have to acknowledge that not everyone will feel comfortable in coming forward. So we need to provide them with the facility to seek support completely confidentially and subtly. It can be done through self-referral into occupational health if you have such a service, or providing support details and making sure that's readily available to everyone in the workplace. So in our case, it's done through intranet portals, mail drops, posters. So our posters actually have QF codes on that can be scanned very subtly by a mobile phone, and that will lead them straight into our employee assistance programme portal. But we also have one that takes them into local support services, whether it be through the NHS or local charities. So we do have some mental health first aiders trained that was started. This was started pre-COVID, and some of those mental health first aiders have already had quite an influence with people in the workplace. You can put mental health awareness training into a toolbox talk. We're making everybody listen to it then, and the people who need that help will listen and take it on board. So I said it was twofold. Secondly, we have to give our managers the skills and encouragement to talk to their team members. They need to understand the impact that high workloads have on individuals and what to look out for. They'd remove a trip hazard if it was in a walkway, because somebody might trip over it and hurt themselves. They can see it can be detrimental to someone's physical health. They also need to understand what impairs mental health and what influence this will have on an individual's actions in the workplace. Do we really want somebody who is feeling suicidal working alone in a gantry crane with only other thoughts to keep them company? Do we want somebody who's had 2 hours sleep driving a straddle carrier? Is it safe? No, it isn't. I'll give you a little example here. My apologies if there's anyone from Peel Ports. You may have heard me talking about this gentleman at a conference we had. I'm going to call him John. But John had been absent from work for several weeks due to a muscular back problem. And I saw John when I first came back to the port. He's not in the first flush of youth, to put it politely, and has worked in the port for many years, and he's a man's man. When I saw him, he looked drawn and appeared really, really flat. So I kind of gently explored his health with him, but he wouldn't acknowledge that he was struggling with his mental health. We arranged for him to return to work with the support of some adjustments into his role. As he was the plant driver, I was really, really concerned that putting this man into this isolated role was going to be detrimental to him. use that back as a bit of an excuse, as a rationale for adjustments, and I just kept bringing him back to see me over the next few weeks, but he just wouldn't engage at all. I can't force people, we cannot force people, but we have to encourage them. Then came the turning point. John walked in one morning, still had his handle on the door as he was closing it, and he just turned around, put his hand up to me and said, "I've just got to say this, there isn't a day goes by when I don't think about killing myself." And at this point, I just sort of looked at him, pointed to the chair and said, "Right, well, let's get some help." Within the next 3 hours, he was straight into the NHS support system, and he hasn't looked back since. But the moral of the story was, John didn't know me at first. He didn't trust me. He didn't know me. I was new into post. He was suspicious. Once we developed that rapport, he felt able to tell me what was a major issue that was impacting on both his mental and his physical health. The repeated muscular back problems are now a thing of the past, and his attendance record is exemplary. He's a bit unhappy he's put weight on because he's eating properly now, but he's a completely different person. Where did we fail him? Well, organisational structure at the time, it has changed now, was that he had, because of the shift patterns, he had a variety of managers. So there was no one named manager for that individual. There was no one he knew well enough to approach. And there was also an underlying fear that his confidentiality wouldn't be maintained and his colleagues would all know that he was struggling and he would be perceived as weak. So whilst I obviously have a bit of a radar for such issues as a nurse, a manager who's equipped with the knowledge of what to look for, who knows the individual and how to sensitively approach a discussion, is in equally as privileged a position. It's about not ignoring someone who looks like they may be struggling, but having the confidence to address and support them. So where I do feel that many organisations, and not just ports, need to improve is supporting those suffering from poor mental health to be able to return to work or to be able to stay in work. We all have high workloads with skeleton staff these days. However, nurturing and supporting our employees through difficult times will pay dividends in the long run, as they'll feel valued and they'll have a more positive approach to work and increase productivity. And I don't want to teach my granny to suck eggs, but it's a win-win for everybody. It can be really difficult to support them at times. So, for example, where individuals require medication, this may take several weeks to have effect. I mean, it's normally three to 6 weeks before they even start seeing a change. During this time, they may struggle with their concentration in safety critical environments. They may find rotational shifts difficult, going between days and nights if they've got disruption to their sleeping patterns. However, to have these individuals sitting at home will further impact upon their mental health, as it's well documented now that regular routine and work is an important factor in recovery for mental health issues. That being said, we do have to protect both the individual and their colleagues, so we will need to help them within the workplace with adjusted duties for a short period, with full support from their managers and OC health professionals if you have them, who are able to assess their improvement and determine with the individual when it's safe for them to return to their full role. I think the days where people had to be 100% well to come to work should have long since been abolished. There are many positives that have come out of the recent high-profile publicity for mental health, and many organisations will have to undertake some cultural shift changes to move forward with society's demands. But at last, society is now starting to acknowledge that mental health is as important as physical health. And we all work within an industry where we have high-risk age groups of predominantly male employees, so particularly young males are at greatest risk of suicide. So many ports are also in areas of socioeconomic deprivation. And unfortunately, it's these groups in these areas who are more likely to suffer from high levels of poor mental health. It is at this point that I need to mention the dreaded C word, COVID-19. So restrictions and the infection rate over the past year have put even more pressure on our industry. We've managed to remain operational despite the national picture, but it's impacted on all of us with huge workloads, high levels of sickness absence, and colleagues who have either contracted COVID-19 or who have lost loved ones as a result of the virus. Keeping mental health on the agenda at this time has been really difficult and challenging, just at a time when more has been needed. But as we come out of lockdown, it is with renewed determination that we should all be looking at increasing our support mechanisms for our employees. I mean, I had to place our manager training on hold as a result of the pandemic. However, we have endeavoured to keep the channels of communication open to the best of our ability with regard to mental health. The pandemic isn't over, despite the significant reduction in cases, and things remain difficult for many of us. The one positive thing that I can see that has come out of this pandemic is the feeling of community spirit and support for each other. I think we've all been on this journey together, whether it's you, me, our plant driver, John. People generally learned to be more tolerant and supportive of each other. And I sincerely hope that this will play its part in reducing the historical stigma that's been attached to mental health issues for so very long. So that's me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Wendy. That's well, fascinating, and yeah, I was quite moved by the story of John, and I'm glad that had a really positive outcome. So to keep things moving along, now we're going to do slightly shorter sessions from each of the remaining panel members. But if you've got good content, I don't want to cut you off. If I could now move on to Peter, please.
Okay, you've got 5 minutes of me, I guess. Yeah, I'm Peter Kelly. I'm a senior psychologist for HSE. Been on this journey with stress and mental health for the best part of 20 years. 20 years ago, people looked at me stupidly and said, why is stress and anxiety and depression an issue? Isn't it all about the money and the profit and what we do? And I said, well, it's it's an emerging issue. And then ironically, I think for probably the last 10 years, we've talked a lot about health and well-being. And then for the last 5 years, we've spent an extortionate amount of money teaching people to cope, which looks very much like the 1990s. So I guess you won't be surprised that I'm going to look at this from an occupational perspective and look at the role of the organization. Mindfulness, resilience, mental health first aiders are tertiary interventions. They're good, they're useful, they should be there. Leave those in isolation and don't actually change the workplace and make the workplace healthier, then you'll get back to where we were in the 90s. The only difference is in the 90s, we had 9 million days lost to work-related stress, whereas last year, 1 week into the pandemic, we had 17.8 million days lost to work-related stress, depression, and anxiety. That's the most days lost to any health condition since we've started taking statistics. Okay, so if anyone says we don't have a problem, then the statistics are very clear that we do have a problem. What's changed in those 20 years? We now connect with technology, we connect with processes, and we've not designed those processes and systems to work with the individual, because we've assumed that this wonderful iPhone I have here is able to do what I need to do. It holds 10,500 files. Those of us who were around in the 70s, this is try and visualize what 10,200 foolscap folders look like. And behind me is an exceptionally large art gallery. Half of that art gallery would be full of files. And we carry these things around with us daily. We interact on social media as well. We go on to Facebook, etc. So why are we in where we are, and why do I think there's a major issue? Well, do you know what COVID has done? And I'll tell you this. We have a global recession. We have a global pandemic. We know a global recession will bring with it mental health issues. We know a pandemic such as Ebola and others creates psychological distress. We have never had a global recession, a global pandemic at the same time. So this if you remember that film, The Perfect Storm, the mental health is the tidal wave that's coming. Okay, so and why do we need to do it now? We need to do it now because the next 5 years our lives are going to be fundamentally changed. The way we work, how we work has changed. For those even working within the Port Authority, the way you do your job now is different than 12 months ago, and the way you're going to be doing it in the next 12 months may be different. And also the fact that for those that have worked in offices, we will not go back to open plan offices. We will not be in the situation where we'll be going back to the norm. The new norm will be finding a way through this. And we have to recognize that the pandemic has the potential, and I say the potential, to be a massive trigger for a lot of mental ill health. It also has the potential to kickstart mental health and well-being. Okay? You need to do organizational interventions to manage the sources of stress and mental health your people are experiencing. You need to show empathy, as Wendy said it. What was the powerful thing about that story? How are you? Now, why is it when we're outside of work and we're in the pub, 12th of April, I've already sorted out my outside seating. How are we, when we say, how are you? And people talk to us, why do we not do that in work? Because we become robots, we disconnect our emotions. Actually, authenticity and compassion is what we should be doing. And it's a powerful, I have stories like that, Wendy, where it's just an instant impact from showing a bit of connection and doing something. So for me, do the organizational bit. And guess what, guys? Under the Health and Safety at Work Act, you are required to protect your workers' health and safety. Not just their safety, their health. Under the management regs, you're required to do a risk assessment for work-related stress and mental health. Okay, we'd like you to, you are required. Okay, and then you're required to do something about those findings. And I should know that because I'm a health and safety inspector. And my job is to look at cases where they come in and decide, have you breached? Now, it's really simple for me. Did you do a risk assessment? No, breach. Okay, easy, do a risk assessment. Okay, you did a risk assessment, but you didn't do anything about it. Oh my gosh, what is that about? That's where the foreseeability argument disappears, doesn't it? Is it reasonably foreseeable? Absolutely, because you've done the risk assessment and you haven't done anything. So there's my nice legal bit, just to reinforce it. Yes, you should be doing this because this is the right thing to do, because it's the right thing for you as your business and for your people, but also it's the right thing to do because it's a requirement in law to do that. And I've worked with recently, and I'm coming towards my 1 minute left. I've worked with a group of people in the foundry sector. I did this campaign on mental health and I loved it, right? And do not tell me, men in a predominantly male industry, you can't get through to them on mental health, because you can. You have to use some interesting language and engagement, but you can get your message across. And if you find within your industry 1 or 2 people that are just enthusiastic on the shop floor, they make the difference. And that's what Farmer and Stevenson were talking about. Sorry, Stevenson and Farmer, because Dennis Stevens didn't want to be called the Farmer Stevenson because he thought they'd think he was a farmer. So that's just a little bit of insight. All right, that's my 5 minutes. Really looking forward to the panel discussion.
Smashing. Thank you very much, Peter. So next up on my list, Stuart. In fact, actually, I've just lost Stuart on the thing, so I'll. No, we're good. Right. So next, I'll hand over to Stuart, and thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Stuart. I think we might be missing your mic.
Is that better? Right, brilliant, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So let me talk to you about where we are with mental health from a Maritime UK perspective. One of the areas that Richard didn't mention was that I'm the current chair of the mental health group for Maritime UK. So we are basing all of our actions and activities on the Thriving at Work document. So we are splitting the team and those that are interested in mental health across the maritime sector into two areas. The first area is the holistic approach, and that is really all about the organizational intervention and improvements that people can make, that you've already heard that Wendy and Peter have already mentioned. So have we got the paperwork in place? Have we got the cultural maturity from the senior management team? Have we got the buy-in from the senior management team to make those changes available to everybody across the sector? So to be able to do that, we use that collaborative approach of stealing with pride. So on the Maritime UK website, there is an area that you can go into to be able to say, who's got a mental health at work plan? Can we use it? Can we see it? Can we adapt it for our own organisation? So that's kind of where the holistic approach and the engagement and the collaboration and the real useful conversations we're having across the sector. The other side is the culture of care, as we've termed it. So this is all about the person, putting them at the centre of everything that we're doing. So have we got the right campaigns? Have we got the availability of the information? Have we got the right level of support and guidance available to enable people to go, oh, I need to go there? And that could be for a seafarer, it could be for a port sector worker and everything else. Just to give you an understanding of where we are within my own organisation, Port of London Authority, we have this 4-year approach. Wendy's right, you cannot do everything overnight in seconds or anything else like that. We have a program of around about 100 items that we want to try and achieve in the next 4 years. Now, some of them are quite straightforward, related to case management, to physio, and to getting that counselling and support available to everybody. And in some cases, we already have that in existence. So to give you an idea and to follow on from what Wendy was saying, we have had an individual within the workplace that was out of work, not coming into the office or not coming into the workshops for over 6 months. We have now managed to get that person back into the workplace, working effectively and enjoying coming to work. Absolutely critical to that arrangements. We're a little bit further behind the case rather than where Wendy was. Excuse me. And we ended up using a clinical hypnotherapist to be able to use their skills to get that person back into the workplace. And it has worked extremely well. In addition to that, the first recognised issues surrounding a person, and Wendy will smile at this as well, we are seeing that back issues are the precursor to potentially mental health issues within the workplace. So if somebody is going off quite regularly with twinges backs and musculoskeletal injuries, the next question we are starting to ask is, how are you? Is everything okay at home? Is everything okay in the workplace? And doing that double check and everything else. So that's kind of where we are, and we are getting a better response from the guys and girls out and about within the organisation. Similarly, just picking up on Peter's elements, we are working quite closely with an occupational hygienist to identify what our health risks are in relation to the work activities that we are doing. That's going to enable us to educate our meta statements and risk assessments so that we can manage the risks effectively and put the appropriate control measures in. But not only that, that information can also go to our occupational physician and nurse to be able to say, if somebody has had an incident or an issue, putting them back into the workplace, knowing what health impacts that we are exposing them to, makes it more educational for that individual, and we can actually bring them back into the workplace in the right way. So it kind of gives you an overview of everything that we are trying to achieve in a brief overview, trying to use that the culture of care and the holistic approach joined together to improve mental health and occupational health across the workplace.
Smashing. Thanks ever so much, Stuart. Could I just, as a little reminder to the audience, who I guess are out there, but it's none of the panelists can see. If you have questions or areas of interest or things that you'd like to pursue with the panel, this is your session. David Brown at the beginning of the meeting this morning said, you know, it's up to you. We need your input, your engagement and challenges. Please do put something into the either the questions section or the chat section in Swapcard, because we want to be able to use the expertise and experience and compassion that we have here within this group to really you know, get you into a place where you can take really positive action. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce or reintroduce Catherine. And Catherine, would you like to give us your take on this? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Good morning, everybody. I'm Catherine Spain. I'm Senior Harbour Master with the Port of London Authority, but here today representing the UK Harbour Masters Association, where I sit on their council representing the South East ports. And I've recently started representing them at on Maritime UK's Diversity in Maritime programme, which includes the mental health in maritime, which Stu has just mentioned. So my role here today is really to come from the perspective of somebody who's actually working in that port environment, speaking to various harbour masters, you know, under increasing amounts of pressure to always just be there and get things done, increase workloads, and I'm very lucky working for the Port of London Authority, and Stu's just outlined some of the programmes and the work, the massive amount of work that's being done regarding mental health in the workplace. But that's not the case for a lot of ports, and especially a lot of the smaller ports and municipal ports, where they're just a kind of out on a limb, you know, run by the council, but often somewhat forgotten seemingly. And these guys have, you know, much smaller resources, fewer people to rely on, and the pressures on them are often immense. And on top of that, with, you know, as Wendy mentioned, the dreaded COVID, you know, not only the pressures of worry about illness and staff reductions, but, you know, I spoke to one port, a harbour master from a port on the south coast yesterday, where they've had a 20% cut in staff, and their staff members are still so worried about whether they'll have a job next week. You know, they see further cuts coming, that there is no sign of recovery for some of those parts of the business that have been lost. And but having said that, the other side of that is, you know, COVID has brought about, and it's brought to the forefront more mental health issues, but has obviously has also had the effect that it is easier to talk about it. It's becoming more acceptable to talk about it, and you know, some of the ports have seen, you know, big burly stevedores who would never have spoken about their problems before are asking to have, you know, coming in off on their shift and asking to see their occupational health person and having a chat with them, which they would never have done before. But it is a big issue, and I've had first experience on a personal level, you know, with close family members suffering from mental health problems, but also with direct members of staff who I've had to manage when they've been going through this. And that's another difficult thing, not just the support for people who are suffering from mental health problems, but the people who are managing people within their workforce that have issues, who don't necessarily have the skills and training to be able to understand fully how to manage those situations, because they're under pressure trying to do the right thing for those people, but also if they're off on long-term sick, they've then got the added pressure of not having enough staff, and that pressure then being put on to other members of their team. So I think I'll stop there.
I've still got time, so I certainly wouldn't want to stop you, cut you off early. So moving on. Really sorry, Claudia, as somebody with a surname beginning with S, I know the thing of being last in the list, but welcome, Claudia. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Richard, and thanks everyone. That's really good points, really interesting points that everybody's made. It's been really insightful listening to you all. So I guess a bit of background. So as Richard mentioned, I'm one of the support managers with Mates in Mind, so main point of contact for our supporters. So really my job is around kind of helping identify any issues that are within the organisation. We usually do this through an organisational assessment and kind of research, and then look to kind of implement that plan and some action points moving forward. So Mates in Mind, a little bit of background, was set up in 2016 with by the Health in Construction Leadership Group and the British Safety Council. So this was following the high statistics of suicide rates within construction specifically, but we now work with sort of transport, logistics. We work with kind of a wider on a wider scale of industries. We work to enable companies to improve their workforce's mental health, addressing the stigma around mental health, any barriers that people have to getting help, and also promoting positive mental well-being as well, which is so important. We rather than take a kind of silver bullet approach to mental health, we see it as much more of a long-term process. It's much more of a, rather than the I think as Peter mentioned, the kind of tertiary measures that companies they kind of go to those tertiary measures of things like mental health first aiders in place, training, employee assistance programs, all of those kind of, and helplines and things like that. When really our focus is on the cultural stuff within the company. So it's the primary and secondary measures. So things like policies, things like the doing employee engagement surveys, doing steering groups, focus groups, making sure you have cross representation across the company, across different levels of hierarchy, to really kind of put in place your plan. All of this informed by data. So we see that as kind of the best way to address it. Look at what you have in place at the moment as an organisation. What are the gaps there? Identify those and then see what areas you need to address. Obviously, the benefits, which Wendy kind of went through a little bit anyway, of kind of investing into mental health, obviously is reducing that lost productivity if someone's off or if they're coming into work and they're ill. Retaining staff, avoiding recruitment and training costs. Meeting duties of care, which has also been addressed as well, reputational risk, but most importantly, creating that culture in which staff feel supported and safe, and really the employees become the front line of well-being within a company. So they know how to spot the signs in themselves that they're struggling, but also spot the signs in their colleagues. We know that the first person people often reach out to when they're struggling is the person closest to them. this can be friends, family, it can be a close work colleague. So it's really important that they feel empowered and confident to have that conversation, and kind of have those skills. But also, it's probably going to be talked about a little bit more, things like line managers as well, that they feel empowered, they feel, they feel they have the skills to start the conversation, embed it into things like each one-to-one, ask them, how are you? How are you really? Asking twice, you usually get a more accurate, a more honest response the second time you ask if someone's okay. But yeah, I think that gives you a little bit of background of kind of our values, how we operate, how we work with organisations. Thank you.
Smashing. Thank you very much, Claudia. Okay, so we're still just compiling some of the questions from the question chat in Swapcard. So I just perhaps wondered if I could kick things off by asking perhaps sort of Wendy, Catherine and Stuart, how prevalent do you think mental ill health is in the UK port sector as a whole? What do you think is the picture?
Shall I start? Based upon when I started 3 years ago, I actually started collating this information, and so it kind of fits into the nationwide picture. So I'm looking at roughly 30% of people I see have a primary mental health problem. Now I use the word primary because quite often, as we've talked about previously, somebody might have a back problem and a whole load of other issues, and they're all kinds of interlinked. But for a primary mental health issue, it's around about 30%. And so I started recording it in 2018, and since then it's kind of stumbled between 28 and 32%, so around about 30%. But that isn't specifically alarming for the port industry, because that's kind of the nationwide picture within every type of organisation.
Catherine, do you have a take on whether you think this is a sort of prevalent issue for our industry?
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely is. I wasn't aware, and I think sort of in a very fortunate position where I work, that but I think it's a really stark figure, and it really makes you sort of sit up and think. If you think about your own workforce, and potentially almost a third of those could be suffering with mental ill health, that's a significant number, and I think that's something that we need to make people more aware of, because it just really kind of sits with me that maybe the issues are wider than we realize, and that we're not necessarily aware of them.
Stuart?
Just talking to other organisations and looking at different sectors, what you tend to find is that those that are interested in mental health within an organisation are perhaps questioning, have I got a mental health issue myself, or have been through a mental health episode, whether it's temporary or more progressive and everything else like that, or they are living with a mental health issue constantly, because we all have mental health, and that's what we need to remember. It's just how people deal with it, manage it, and everything else. So have we seen an increase? Yes, we have seen an increase, but I think it's because we are now more open to the conversation, and as people start to see and feel more comfortable to say, yes, I have that, I have a problem, or they're finding out that somebody within their team is getting support because they've raised an issue, they're more willing to come forward. So have we seen a spike within the PLA? I would say yes, in terms of recording it and reporting it. But I think what you will find is that, as Wendy has said, we are roughly the same as similar as what everybody's reporting, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 approximately, of people managing or dealing with a mental health whilst in the workplace.
Okay, thank you. So to perhaps make a very rough, so this isn't just the latest buzz phrase or a topic that seems to have managed to get to the top of the agenda. This is real and meaningful and has a direct impact on people and the success of businesses. Yeah. Okay. Good. I'm getting nodding, so I'll carry on. Peter, I was just wondering, sort of, is that consistent with what you see in other industries? Those sorts of numbers. The fact that this is a real challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if 1 in 4 of us are going to suffer from a mental health issue, then it will be. There is 10 of us here, so 2 of us have had a mental health problem in our lifetime. I'm number 1. I suffer from anxiety. I've had it for 20 years. It's my silent partner, and we share this road together. If I get really tired, I get really anxious. So I have an element of managing it, but also my employer manages it by realizing, actually, I might have a really bad day and go, it's a shocker. And I think that's having that conversation with employees really important. There's a gross underreporting. Until we break down the stigma of mental health and the amazing work mates of mine do amongst some of the sectors they work in is brilliant. It's that simple conversation of it's okay. I go on construction sites now and they talk about mental health. They talk about having a crap day. They talk about what that means. Yeah. And I think, I think so. We have got to stop making excuses for male sectors for not doing this on mental health, because I've worked with some exceptionally gifted men out there who you look at and go, they just look like, they don't cry. And do you know what? The moment they say, I have had a difficulty, it cracks everything that goes through. And the beautiful thing is when you have women in a lot of these male environments, we begin to crack that down. So, I just think there is a gross underreporting. We are, if we don't do something now, looking at an increase, and we need to do something about it. And I'm not making excuses for people anymore. I'm tired of people saying it's too hard. But it's not. It's only if you're soft. That's rubbish. It's not about soft. It's a common mental health problem. It happens to all of us, and sometimes we have a really bad situation and we have a reaction. I often say to people, it's a normal reaction to an abnormal situation, and actually give yourself some space, give yourself some time to say, that this is okay. And yes, so I guess it's in a long-winded way, because I'm a civil servant and a psychologist. What you're saying, I do confirm, but I do think it's an underrepresentation. If we really, really knew what the situation was, then we would be doing substantially more. And that's why there is a load of conversations and talk around mental health at the moment, isn't there? And interestingly, as I said before, the pandemic started that conversation. No, it was happening before, but it's put it into the mindset of people. So yeah, sorry, bit of a Hyde Park moment there.
Not at all. So Claudia, I think perhaps if I could ask you the question as well, sort of looking at from what you know of ports, but perhaps what you know of wider UK PLC.
I would say in terms of the rates of kind of mental health, poor mental health. I would say it's not surprising. I do agree that I think it's underreported. We know that every week 1 in 6 adults in the UK experiences symptoms of a common mental health condition. So it's not even just that the problem isn't even just when it gets to the point where they need help and they need to reach out and it's diagnosed as a mental health condition. It's before then as well, and that cohort of people that need to be protected. And we know that 1 in 5 adults have considered taking their own life at some point as well. So the statistics are high. And I think, there's many ways to address it. And I think when we were talking about the kind of measures that companies put in place, they're all really great. We know that the actual, for instance, with an employee assistance program, we know that 1/3 of people are suffering with mental ill health at the moment, but there's the people that reach out to the employee assistance program, the EAP, is about between 1% and 4%. So yeah, I think the statistics are really high. I do think it's underreported, but getting better. Yeah, the actual kind of help seeking part of it as well is really lacking.
Can I just say though, with Claudia, we have to make this a common conversation. You know, actually, it's too late at the EAP stage. We should be prevention. We should be promoting mental health and seeking to address mental ill health and not mix the two up. They're very clear. Mental ill health is an outcome. Mental health is what sustains you in work and keeps you in work and maintains you and gives you that sense of purpose and hope. You know, I big up Mates in Mind, but unbelievable resources on there to start in those conversations, including ourselves, you know, the talking toolkits around work-related stress. But prevent, don't treat, yes, treat, but don't see treat as the ultimate thing. It must be about the prevention by promoting mental health, create mentally healthy workplaces in the ports, places where people come to work and they feel engaged and happy. Sorry, there you go.
No, brilliant. Sorry, Claudia, did you want to say any further on that?
Totally agree. And that's where we talk about kind of the culture of a company and things like that. It's kind of wider than just helping someone at the point of need. It's much before then that you'd look to supporting everyone. And that's why we talk about, you know, not just those professionals within a company helping and reaching out and speaking to people, which is all great, but actually the employees as well, the people, you know, people on the ground kind of helping each other and speaking to each other is really, really key.
I think that's a fascinating piece around such a small percentage of people reaching out to EAP systems, even once they've got to that trigger point of feeling then, you know, that's a need for them. Because I think there are organisations in UK industry that would sort of say, well, our EAP has got tiny, you know, micro use, so therefore we've probably not got a problem.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing is that wouldn't necessarily be the correct conclusion from that fact.
What you need to be worried about is the 21% that are not. It's 1 in 4, 25%. What are those 24% doing? What do we do to help those that they can't identify with EAP? That's the prevention element. That's why you got people like Wendy.
Thank goodness. So just to say as well, obviously with Mates in Mind, Port Skills and Safety is a you know, proud to be a supporter of Mates in Mind and a partner with Mates in Mind, and we have an MOU and from the early days, I'm not sure whether it was a Mates in Mind point that was made, but there was I remember being told of a survey where people were more likely to admit to having done a stretch of time at Her Majesty's pleasure than they were to admit to having a mental ill health condition or a challenge. So I think that's quite sobering. Well, it was to me anyway. What kind of things does an employer need to do to at least comply with the law? Peter, you said that there's, there are some fundamentals here, that there is a responsibility for health, an employer's responsibility for health and creating workplaces that do not damage somebody's health. What do you think compliance looks like? So let's just start with something as basic as compliance. I know there is more. Would anybody like to have a punt at that?
I'll come in at the end.
Stu, do you have a thought on that?
To be compliant, so I come from the construction sector. I've only been in the port sector for a little over 18 months now. So I know what the construction sector were doing and everything else. And when I've moved into the maritime sector, I'm seeing the same issues being presented today as they were in the construction sector. Where things went slightly askew, in my opinion, is that people grabbed hold of, we're doing a wellbeing campaign. We're telling people all about cancers, mental health. We're talking about it and doing all of the campaigns and saying, aren't we fantastic? And we've done a wellness campaign. What they didn't follow up, and this is perhaps where it's going to link in with Peter, is understanding the risks and associated pieces that we are exposing people to, and then changing the practices within the workplace. And I think that's why I mentioned earlier about the occupational hygienist. When you start talking about an occupational hygienist, people think you need a dentist. No, an occupational hygienist is a person that assesses the health impacts associated with work activities. And if we can put that together with the wellness campaign, it's a lot more targeted, and we will make a difference to everybody else. And that will also help people's mental health, because we're doing something, putting less stresses on them, less anxiety, because we're communicating with them better, and them understanding their job roles better. So that's kind of where I would come from.
Any others like to jump in before Peter gives us the model answer? Now, Peter, please.
Okay. I'll give you the psychologist and the inspector at the same time. Compliance is coherence with the regulations. So Section 2 of the Health and Safety at Work Act requires you to manage and control the risks to your workers or employees and members of the public to their health and safety. Do you know what? It's not the safety executive, is it, on its own? Health and safety. So let's remember that. In the management regs, Section 3 requires a risk assessment. It is a duty. It's not we'd like you to. You are required to do a risk assessment. Section 5 requires you to do something about the findings of that risk assessment. So in itself, the basic principles as an inspector I'm looking for is, if I have to go and do an investigation because you've got a series of stress cases, did you do a risk assessment? What did you do about it? And then it's for the inspectorate to make the duty call as to whether or not what you did is appropriate. We know the principle of health and safety is foreseeability. Failure to do a risk assess, you might argue, wasn't foreseeable. And you wouldn't work because you're required to do it. Having a well-being program, having mental health first aiders, having training, mindfulness and resilience really doesn't make much difference to the determination as to whether or not there's a breach. It's nice to see that you've got it, but if it's practically you're not managing the organizational elements, then it's like me going into a factory and there's a lathe, and I go up and say, why is there no shield? Why is there no guarding on the lathe? Well, you know, we didn't think we really needed it. I don't like to use it, or I wouldn't accept an excuse for not having a guarding around a lathe, or for a safety management system for accessing a crane in a port. I've got a basic standard of what I expect, and that's the same for stress. So yeah, so that is what compliance should look like. We do have a criteria on our webpage that says what we will investigate on work-related stress. We don't investigate individual cases, because you know, that's normally up to ACAS and other areas to go through. But we would, if the right case came along where there was a series of people being made ill, we would do it, because we did it for asbestos, we did it for mesothelioma, we've done it for respiratory disorders, and we could do it for that. So yeah. So saying all of that, if you prevent it by doing this and you promote mental health, you won't need to be accessing the same level of support services. Prevent, promote, support. And at the heart of that is the promotion of mentally healthy workplaces. Why do we go into work and go, make me ill? Because why do we not change the workplaces to make people healthy? Where does it say on your contract, I'd like to be made ill? It doesn't, does it? And that's the reality, because we go, oh, the system, change the system to fit around the people. That's the other side of it, which is compliance is about looking at the system and making alterations, not just on the people as well. Does that help?
Certainly helps me. Does anybody want to come in on that? Or actually, I now see there's quite a few questions in the chat. So if people
I'm going to run away now.
Looking off screen at my chat screen and not paying attention to the making eye contact. So I've got a question here. This is an open question for the panel. This is with regard to being friends or working professionally with people who may have an undiagnosed condition, such as, for example, dyslexia, but are not aware of it. How would you approach this with the objective of facilitating a better working environment for that friend or colleague? Anybody want to pick up on that one?
Well, I'm dyslexic, and moderately dyslexic. I just can't write. That's why I do these webinars. So the same way you'd say to your mate in the pub. Sorry, I'm going back to the pub. It's a theme because I've not been in one for a very long time. But it's that, or the coffee shop, or the kitchen in the work. Just say, hey, is it, you know, as a line manager, what can you do? How can we make this work better? And having a really open conversation. I mean, I'm very fortunate. My line manager knows what my skills are and what I'm not good at. So that kind of, yeah. And it's the same with mental health. I mean, we've got the principles: eyes, look, listen, and speak only when you need to. These senses are there for a reason. They're you know, so yeah. If you're going to change it to mental health, I sometimes say to people, how are you traveling? It's an Australian term. How are you traveling? What's the road like? Is it straight? Is it got lots of potholes? As where we are. And if it's got potholes, what does that mean? You know, where would you put yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 on that road? And sometimes that gives people the opportunity to say, I'm a 5. That opens the conversation up with people, both about dyslexia and mental health.
Anybody else like to chip in on that? Wendy, oh, sorry, Stu.
To jump in on that one. So something that we haven't done yet, but we are talking to mates in mind about it. And that is, we need to engage with our senior managers for them to be able to spot certain signs, whether it's mental health, whether people are struggling or anything else like that. So there is a great course for mental health for managers and that side of things. We just need to perhaps that slightly to cover off some of the aspects that we are looking for and discussing. My approach, if somebody were struggling with the dyslexia or struggling to complete a document and that side of things, my approach is always to sit down with them, help them out, talk it through. I hate emails personally myself. They can be misconstrued or anything else. I'd rather have a conversation than a follow-up email, because then that's just reiterating what people have said. Face-to-face conversations should be promoted far more than emails, telephone calls, or anything else. You can see people. Behaviours are all about seeing a person. It's 83% of how we get our communication across. So if that's what we should be doing, that's the best thing that we should be sort of focusing on.
I'd agree with that, and I think that the COVID situation has made that more difficult in a lot of cases, because we have a lot of operational staff who are in the port working. They're shift workers, they have to be there, they've been there right the way through the pandemic, and the majority of their managers are working from home a lot of the time, and the contact is a lot less. They're seeing people a lot less because they have to have COVID secure workplaces that people would normally walk through and have a general chit chat, and that isn't happening now because those spaces are secure, and so a lot of those conversations that would be happening aren't happening at the moment.
Wendy?
There's two things that I mentioned earlier that I think are critical here. One, the first point is communication is the key, isn't it? But secondly, it's also giving our managers those skills to be able to actually put their workload aside and actually have a look and see what's going on, perhaps sometimes under their noses. Give them the actual skills to be able to identify if somebody's struggling or having a problem. And that's where our manager training comes in.
So actually, there is a question from Emma Lewis. It says, what training do you find effective for managers to provide them with the support that they need to be able to then support people that come to them or observe and perhaps head off at the pass with people?
I might answer this one. So
yep.
I think so we have lots of experience in kind of training up, upskilling managers. And I think, in my opinion, the best way to get through to people is often quite an informal way, and not kind of formal training where it's like a PowerPoint and a lecturer and that kind of format. I think it's better if it's a discussion. So a facilitated discussion where people talk about their own experiences and things like that can be really beneficial. I think also perhaps bespoking it to your company as well and your industry. That's why sort of a lot of our training is kind of geared towards the male-dominated construction kind of that sort of language and things like that, but specifically to your company as well, and look at the actual culture of your company, the way in which you normally communicate with each other, and kind of don't make it like an alien conversation. It's actually just a very natural conversation, and also to follow up as well, and not just look at it as the training is kind of the training's great, but it's also around the structure that you have around it. So is it part of a plan? Or is just you're kind of throwing some training in to just see what it does. So I'd look at it, it's really relevant. The content is really relevant to those managers and the way in which your company works. But also the conversation is continued after the training as well with them.
I'll
Wendy?
jump in at this point as well. I did say before about we put our manager training on hold, and the reason for that, you can put things online, you can have people going through PowerPoint presentations. It's a tick box exercise, isn't it? And managers will do it because they are told they've got to do it, but they're not actually taking anything away from that. And I think you need to do this type of training, you actually need to look into the whites of people's eyes. And I think what Claudia said is really relevant. It has to be informal, it has to be relevant to that area. And I think that they will get far more, managers will get far more from that kind of training environment than sitting in front of a computer any day.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this partly ties in with Colin Bassam's question as well about engaging high-level management, but how do you engage the middle management and the line management? And you know, that's a conversation I've had at least twice in the last week on other matters, where we have campaigns for various things. The buy-in from the top, our CEO, always very keen, the senior management all sign up to it. But it's the line managers that have actually got to deliver it and manage the workforce. And often it comes in the form of another training course. For shift workers, that means that they have to be taken off shift. That line manager then has to cover that shift with someone else on a workforce that's already under pressure and struggling to cover the shifts that they've got. And it becomes you know, if you're not careful, it becomes a real headache for those line managers to actually manage those circumstances and that training. And I think, you know, if you can get them on board and have that kind of informal and way of doing it, I think that's really good. But it really does rely on their buy-in in order for it to work.
And there's actually research on this. There's a gatekeeper theory, which says that supervisors filter out safety and health and safety messages. So if you don't get them on board, they just filter it out. You don't get it. You know, as with Claudia and Wendy, keep it real. You know, when I went into this foundry sector, just an illustrate, I went into a foundry sector, this big foundry, like come up and said, "This is crap. I'm not doing mental health. That's for softies." I went, "All right, sound." Anyway, it was in the first session, and I just said to him, I said, "So, you know, if I gave you a newspaper today, what would you say about mental health?" And I got into to talk about stereotypes that they were impacted by, and then I actually said, "Well, okay, how many of you here have got family members that have had a bereavement recently, or they've lost a dog, or they've done something? How did it feel?" And you changed the context of that conversation. Now, at the end of that day, he came up to me, massive lad, put this 40 kilo. He said, "Look, take a picture of me with this 40 kilo casting mold on his shoulder." And he said, and he smiling, and he said, "Mate, I got it." Because we were able to change the language and change the conversation, but you had to do it at where they're at. I couldn't come in a suit. I have some really nice suits, but I couldn't come in a suit. I came in a t-shirt and a pair of jeans, and I gave it to them double-barreled, and that's because I knew that sector, and I think that's really important. Double-barreled is not in a bad way. Just trying to think double barrels and guns and all that, but no, but you know what I mean. You have to be really open and honest with people. They see you as a fraud if you're not real and you're not genuine. And that, and you know, and I'm fortunate I work in Liverpool, so me and Wendy are like spent 20. I'm an adopted Scouser. I'm Australian, but I'm adopted Scouser.
So we have conducted a survey, a sort of an anonymous survey of port employees, and around about 11% of respondents said that they would be prepared to go to their manager to have a conversation if they thought there was you know, if they felt they needed some support. So we've talked a little bit about what you might have to do to support the managers in that process, but that leaves us with, by my terrible maths, another 89% who wouldn't go to their managers. Is that you know, this is a sample survey. I'm not, you know, I'm not making claims for it being statistically significant, but that is quite a high figure. Does that seem overly high? And even if it doesn't, how do we change that perception of managers or supervisors as, you know, as a genuine place to go for support? Any thoughts, Claudia? Is that something?
Yeah, I was just thinking. So, yeah, as we mentioned, there's to me it's not so surprising, I think, that there's that many that would reach out to a line manager because of the stigma that still exists in kind of male dominated industries. Quite often the managers will be male as well. So it's I think there's a lot of messaging that could be kind of brought into the conversation. So I think there's a lot of worries generally with people. What we see is people are worried that they'd lose their job if they disclosed a mental health issue. So it's really, I think, the leaders in the company and kind of just the messaging throughout training and kind of tying it all together is that you're not just going to lose your job if you disclose something like a mental health illness. Will support you. It's got to be, that really strong message of support to try and get people to open up to line managers, obviously get them upskilled, but also look at the other help-seeking behaviours. There may be that just the way that your company is structured and the communications that have been sent out of kind of unknowingly you've guided them more towards another direction. So just sort of to check in and see perhaps that perhaps they're talking to each other, perhaps they're talking to their peers. In that case, a bit of general awareness training for everybody is probably needed. And that's actually a really great thing if they are speaking to each other. It's not necessarily a totally bad thing if it's not, line managers, but it also, it obviously helps with, ideally want to get to a place where everybody is involved and everyone's talking to each other. So the line managers are talking to the mental health first aiders who are talking to the Occ Health, to the EAP. So it's all kind of you've got the, we normally encourage people to kind of keep all the data from everything in one place, and just ensure that there's communications going on between the services as well, just so you've got that kind of overall sort of support bubble rather than just line managers, I think.
A coherent network of interconnecting solutions, so defence in depth rather than relying on a single point of failing. Definitely, yeah.
The whole process needs to be linked up. There's no use having a mental health first aid if you've not got anything to give them afterwards. They're there to guide you to what should be afterwards. And if you haven't lined your EAP up because you didn't think about it, then you've got a problem, because you've got people that you've offered something but you haven't got something to give them. Which is if you're reliant on mental health services outside in the community, then you've got 12 months. So in some cases, so the EAPs need to be lined up to work alongside the mental health first aid. 11% no, I'm not surprised, but I'm hopeful by the time I retire in 10 years, that'll be more towards 20-25%. And if they let me work on, I'll carry this on until whenever, because it is something we should be able to talk. Why do we have only 11%? Can you imagine 11% of your kids talking to you as parents? What would you do? You've got a major problem in parenting, haven't you? But you wouldn't, you know what I mean? I'm not saying they're kids. I'm saying we already do this. We talk, we listen, and we offer solutions. Let's just do the same things at work. And yeah, it really isn't hard. I mean, I say it isn't hard. I've got a very good relationship with my line manager. He will text me at 9 o'clock in the morning and say, get out of your bed, because I know you're still in bed. I have that kind of relationship with him. But you know what? That's part of my sort of strategy. That actually, I know he's supporting my mental health as well as my physical health, and I just think little things like that, showing a bit of interest, it will, and making it just real, I think will help in those conversations. And it's you can have training to talk to people, unconscious bias, all of that. But if you then use those innate emotions that we've got, that we're triggered as humans to do, which is to communicate in a compassionate way, then do that. What happened when the head of Lloyd's went off with work-related stress? Did the bank collapse? No. On the back of it, they built a wellbeing program. Why? Because the leader stood up and said, I'm in a bad place and I need to find a way out of this. It's the power. It's very powerful when we start sharing our emotions. Okay, which is not about giving everyone a hug. I know I'm a psychologist, but so I'm also desperate to do that. I've not hugged anyone for 11 months, It's really hard as an extrovert not to hug anyone. So, but yeah. Have you seen me in the street after the 12th? You can give me a big high five.
I've got a question here. Sorry, Peter, you again. That says, could Peter comment further on Section 5 of the Health and Safety at Work Act when talking about legal requirements?
Yeah. So this, you have to, once you have acknowledged risks, you have to put in place what are reasonable adjustments to manage that risk. So the judgment call is what is then made by the inspector, or in the case of the work-related stress case, it would be me, what I would regard as reasonable. Now, would the provision of a training course on resilience be reasonable? No, because for me, that's not managing the risk. So I would expect you to be doing something that identifies as your risk. So if it's an organizational risk because you've got excessive demands, what have you done to mitigate those demands? What changes have you made that change that work environment? So if you've got a consultant who's come in and they've looked at your process and said, if you do these tweaks here, you'll improve, this will improve the flow of the demands, then that for me is a reasonable adjustment. It doesn't need to be consulted. It can just be people in your own organization. It's like any risk, really. Except on the guarding on a machine, it's you go up, you put a guarding on a machine, you're compliant. Yeah. But that's not the same for health issues. You have to do a series of things to get that impact. Asbestosis and mesothelioma as conditions required a number of things to happen for compliance. Then it's the same with mental health. So yeah, it's doing something. Does that help? I mean, so Section 5 has shown that what you've done is the important thing, is how you've controlled the risks at an organizational level. Okay, that's quick for me.
Yeah, no, that's grand. So one question that came up for my the other question is, you've only got 20 minutes to get your questions in for anybody who's on the thing. Are we asking too much of line managers to try and manage productivity and handle pandemic and do more with less resource, and by the way, help support potentially one in 4, 1 in 5 of your people? Is that too much? Is that actually going to create an issue for them?
Can I just throw a little bomb in here? If you don't have an organization with a future. Do you understand? That's where we're at. You have to manage people's mental health. It's not like just a nice to do. The organizations that buffet the recession, that have buffeted these things, are organizations that manage people and their people's health. Look at the times 100 companies to work for. All of them look after their people's well-being and their mental health and their physical health. So I would argue that actually this is central to being a good manager. It's the bit that makes the difference between just being a transactional manager, which is go and do the job as the way I want you to do it, to being the transformational manager that says, oh, I believe in you and I want you to go and do this. Yeah. And you can do that in any job. You can teach transformational, you can be transformational in any job. If you're working on a crane or if you're sat as a CEO in a large multinational, it's the same principle. So yeah, it's not really a bomb, but it's just, I think it's absolutely central to good management, is the management of people.
Catherine, do you have a take
well,
on that?
I agree, but the key is ensuring that those line managers have the right tools in order to do it. I think it's not too much to expect, and as Peter said, it has to be done, but we need to ensure that they are given the necessary support and the tools to be able to deliver it.
Claudia, is that?
I agree, and I think I definitely agree with the point that it makes a good manager, and I think there's always room to improve. and it's not. I think people can get quite defensive, perhaps, when it comes to like management style and that sort of thing. When actually, it doesn't take any effort at all, really, to drop into conversation. How are things going? And when we talk about this long-term continuous thing, it's not so much as well, mental health isn't kind of a project that starts and ends. So it could be that this goes on for months or years for that individual. So it's about kind of dropping into conversation, not just seeing it as something that's, we've provided this service, we've provided the support, and now it's done, it's closed, it's sort of, it's continuous. Sorry, my dog gets upset when someone leaves the house. But I think as well, with line managers, I don't think it takes any really much effort at all to do something like that. And I think when we talk about cultural change, there's a lot to be said for, the easiest way that we kind of explain what we mean by culture change to organizations is when you come out of the bathroom at work, is your boss tapping his watch at you? Is he sort of like, where have you been? And it's that sort of, those sort of things cause stress for people, and they cause decline in mental well-being, and it ties in with all sorts of things to do with maybe the humor of a company and banter, and when that goes a bit too far, and there's all sorts of things like that can be sort of tied in with it. So it's not just like a set kind of training them up to deal with having that conversation. It's train them up to have the skills to understand when someone is upset or stressed by something that they are doing themselves. And it sounds quite strong, but it's there's always improvements to be made across the whole business, and that's just one of them.
Wendy?
From my point of view, I think it's about the managers. The managers developing themselves as well in how their management style is, and I don't think it's going to have a huge burden on their workload. But I do think with correct training, those managers would be able to engage with their team members more effectively. So I don't think it's about putting additional burden on. I think it's about opening those channels of communication effectively.
Okay, brilliant. I've got a perhaps associated question here. Would you agree that there are high functioning managers that, despite being fantastic at their jobs, just lack the sort of emotional intelligence, regardless of what tools and training you might give them? It's just not part of their DNA.
Only if they're a zombie. Not part of their DNA. Not part of their DNA to show human emotions. Wow.
I think some people find it more difficult to relate to people than others, and there's always going to be personalities involved. But I mean, I'd question whether they are actually getting the right training. I mean, people often end up in management positions because they've been in operational positions, they've been very good at their job, they've been promoted, and they get trained on all sorts of things. But the human element is the thing that they need most training on and often get least training on. So managing people is the hardest part of being a manager. Managing the books and managing the paperwork, the files, the emails, that's the bit that most people can cope with. Managing people is a whole different skill, and often people just get thrown into management roles with very little understanding of that side of it.
In the UK, we promote on delivery of products, not on people. And if you turn it around, you deliver with your people, you deliver your products at speed, at quality, and at a level of enthusiasm. So absolutely. You can train people about unconscious bias, about having conversations, and some people will feel a little bit uncomfortable. I totally accept that. I just think I'm really optimistic because I think you can grow something with just those things that they do externally and try and get them to realize actually this doesn't have to be as much of an uncomfortable conversation. I had one manager who was really not comfortable with the emotional side of things, and I had to say, well, this is me and this is how I sort of function, and we had to work together to find a way through that. And I think that's maybe like that is actually but actually making it okay to have conversations. There's a utility company about 15 years ago said, "Be here now." It was on the back of the name tag. It was when you used to have offices, and it said, "Be here now," and it just facilitated the fact that people could have conversations about any range of things. If somebody came in, they were told you could stop work and you could listen, and that cost £70 because it was for stickers. They're very nice stickers, but it saved that company. In terms of days lost, 3 days a week were saved, and they equated to £1.2 million. Not a bad return on investment for being here now to listen to people, was it?
So I'm conscious that we've got probably about another 10 minutes or so to go. I'd like to very quickly ask about mental health first aiders, because that's cropped up a number of times. One question's come in about whether or not there should be basic mental health first aid training for all staff. But what does the panel think are the benefits and perhaps the limitations of mental health first aiders? Wendy, do you want to kick off?
I go first. I think there should be mental health awareness for everybody. I think mental health first aiders, we have to be very careful that the right individuals are chosen. So those individuals have got to have a good level of communication and be able to relate to individuals. So there are some individuals whose personality would make it almost a pointless exercise to put them through mental health first aid training, because people, they might not be that approachable, so people aren't going to go to them. So from that point of view, we do have to be quite selective with mental health first aiders. And we have got trained mental health first aiders, and we started to roll it out pre-COVID, and that certainly there's a fair few of those people who've had that training who really benefited from it, and have supported people and have gone. Sometimes the affected individual has gone to them and sought them out, but other times they have just gone to the individual and had the "Are you okay?" conversation, and then the "Are you really okay?" conversation, you know, because we gave them those skills to be able to go and do that, to have those conversations with people. And I think that really helps. So there is some benefit from, in my opinion, of having mental health first aiders or something akin. Again, it depends on the organisation and how the organisation is set up. You know, I mean, we've obviously got multiple sites, so we have done some training on a lot of the sites, but we haven't got to them all yet. I feel personally that it's a benefit, but then the last organisation I worked for, who were a very large organisation, we rolled this out there as well, and it worked incredibly well because we had quite a problem. So, and if you go back to what we were saying before about the employee assistance programme and the uptake, you know, if you get to 3%, you're doing fantastically well on uptake with an employee assistance programme. So where are these people going to go? Where, you know, I'll take you back to your 89% that you quoted before, Richard. Where are those 89% going to go? There has to be something. It's fine if you've got occupational health and they have that facility and they have that availability to be able to react. But you've got to train your managers as well. And but there may be a personality clash between the individual and their manager. The individual might not feel that they can approach their manager. So it's having something else in the workplace. It shouldn't be a solution. It's just yet another tool for us to use to improve mental health in the workplace.
Claudia, I know that obviously Mates in Mind provide support and mental health first aider training. Do you think there are limitations, or how do you think they're best deployed?
I think it's a really interesting one because it's very good to have mental health first aiders. I think they benefit the business. They're just someone, there's someone in the business that has that in-depth knowledge around mental health, around who to signpost to and that sort of thing. So it's a protective measure. I think where they can be optimized is, as Wendy said, it needs to be the right people who you're putting onto the course. Quite often companies will tell people that they're going to be mental health first aider. It's often better to have them volunteer because they have better engagement. It's potentially quite a long-term role that they'll be in. I think they really need to understand the role as well, and it's not just a sort of extra thing that you can say you do within on top of your role. It's an important role. It can be stressful. There's certain mental health first aiders I know within companies that one person will kind of get loads of texts, loads of calls, loads of conversations, and then they become stressed. So you need that support beneath them as well. You need to keep some sort of structural model in place around the mental health first aiders. That can be really useful. Putting that structure in place just means that everything is kind of watertight. If you've got a problem, then it's not that one mental health first aider has never heard from anybody and one person gets all of the, has all of the conversations. Feedback on the data, report on the data. It doesn't have to be exactly, what conversations they're having. It's just at least, how many people are reaching out, how they're reaching out to them. Especially at the moment, it's all a bit disjointed, our communications. And make it kind of very normal to have a chat with a mental health first aider, and same with the EAP as well. If you make it kind of really acceptable and normal and almost casual, that if you are struggling or you're a little bit stressed, you still go to your mental health first aider. You don't need to be at the point of crisis to reach out to somebody. So the messaging, the communications around those services is really important. Also perhaps to have some sort of steering group around this, or at least that the mental health first aiders meet with each other and kind of discuss how they're finding the role. It's really important that they have that communication as well, so they all know what's going on. You have the same sort of meetings within health and safety for sort of things, physical health, so same with the mental health first aiders. But I would say that they're a protective measure, but I think as the other speakers have kind of touched upon, I think the general awareness for everybody is really, really important. Just that kind of education around mental health, spotting the signs in others, starting the conversation, how you can do that sort of, some people don't hold the sort of natural skills and have those conversations, and can be quite daunting. But providing phrases that they can start that conversation with, just as simple as that, can really help people. Yeah, I think that's yeah.
Superb. I think that we are approaching last orders. So if I could perhaps just ask everybody on the panel to give me one, if you do one thing, if the organization does one thing, or individuals do one thing, what's the one message that you'd like delegates to go away from having heard what you've had to say today? Wendy, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, go and ask people if they're all right, and don't take the first answer, ask them again.
Claudia?
Yeah, it'd be probably as simple as that. Just look out for one another and don't be afraid to have that conversation, because it can mean you don't know what it means for the individual that you're asking, and you don't know what that first step will be doing for that person, and maybe they've not spoken to anyone yet. So start the conversation. Yeah.
Catherine?
Yeah, I mean, a similar vein, really. I think to just always have it in the forefront of your mind whenever you're talking to your staff, whether it's just to ask a simple question or whether you're approaching them about something related to work, but always have that in the forefront of your mind about, think about them and how they are.
Lovely. Peter?
Be authentic.
Authentic.
And just be authentic and be compassionate. And if you see me out in the park, because I walk on my own, give me a wave, because that will make a difference to my day. And you'll be surprised how a quick call or a wave can make a difference to people's days, particularly if you in the unfortunate position of not being able to go into an office or into your workplace. So yeah, being authentic. Yeah, if you had longer, I'd tell you about the birds I've adopted in my garden and the squirrel that I now feed. So yes, but tremendous opportunity. Obviously, I'm deeply passionate about this, and it is 12:30. But be authentic. It's not going away. It can be managed.
Brilliant. So don't be afraid to ask. Always keep this in the forefront. Be authentic. Promote mentally healthy workplaces and support people in those environments. Sorry, Stu, I wasn't sure whether we still had you. So do you have a last word?
Last word on mental health. Speak, listen, and be there for people, basically. Break the silence.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, everybody. This has been an extraordinary panel, myself excluded. I thank you so much for the time and the thought and the care and the authenticity that's come through. So if I can say thank you, Wendy, Peter, Stuart, Catherine and Claudia, you've been brilliant. If I could also thank Jen, Nicola and David from the first session this morning. Thanks to the team at Clarion, so Robert, Laura and Sarah, who have gone through all kinds of pain to try and make sure that we were organised and together, and this looked as slick as it has done. Thank you ever so much for your support there. And thanks to the PSS team who've done a brilliant job behind the scenes, the behind the curtain stuff. Rian, Sharon, Rob and Marcio. We can only do this with everybody's participation. Thank you ever so much, and I'll probably better shut up now. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.